You guys have funny theories of why I'm late, so since we're all here, how about like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends, and let's start. So honestly, I'll tell you what happened. First of all, I'm sorry that I'm late. It's rude and unacceptable, but sorry. Yes, no excuses. Oh, you just fell asleep. It's okay. It's Israel. Basically, yes, you're being accurate here. All right, so I'll tell you what had happened. So my friend sent me a video, and it was about an economic theory, basically, obviously, what the book was written about, and asked me what's my opinion about it. And I watched it, and about 2 sentences in, I was like, this is so much work to try to explain everything. Like, why is it wrong? But yeah. All right, you guys are I see your compliments in the hello atheist gamer. Hi, Shauna. Yeah, I did. I've adopted Indian timing. Hi, Pavel. How y'all doing? All right, I think I'll start with, is everyone here? Should I start? Usually people are just, they take their time. They look for me to start, and then they start joining in. And it's always a dilemma. Should I just dive in and then let people join in the middle, basically, or should I wait a little bit for people to join? And I think waiting is good. So this way I can say, hi, everybody. Hello, Daniel. Hi, Zainab. All right. So I'll tell you the story, and I apologize if I look a bit red in general. Can you hear me fine? Is everything fine? I hope so. Okay. Tag Mechir Tzedek is here. Hello, how you doing? Okay, so here's the pet peeve. I think that's perfect because yesterday I also listened to a podcast who had featured a woman, and what she did is she had studied and researched how the USSR, in what methods did they perpetuate anti-Zionist ideas, and anti-Semitism soon followed, and what methods they used. Okay, so for anyone who is smart, to be honest, because some people are not smart, but in general, those who grew up in the Soviet Union are more aware of those methods because it's been used everywhere. And sometimes understanding the methods that they used was the difference between understanding everything and nothing, and basically basic survival skill was to understand like how they lie, what kind of data they omit, how to read between the lines, and what truth they choose to present, and ask yourself, is that really the truth? And you can actually learn a lot from lies. But that's the interesting part, is that they always lie partially. Because if you lie in a complete, if it looks like a complete lie, it's pretty hard to sell. If you just present certain information in a certain way, then you can create whatever narrative you want. Unfortunately, I feel like people who grew up in the West are less aware of those methods, and they tend to just accept things more. And here is the fun story I heard. Fun. So I don't know how many of you. Wait, am I too loud? You're saying. Am I being too loud? Because I saw that Shauna said I can hear you even over my husband snoring. And is the volume too loud? Is that me? Yes, Bruce, hit like. Oh, that's fascinating. My social worker is from Congo, so this could be interesting if the thumbnail is anything to go by. Yes. So a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit because I'll be honest, okay? I wanted to share with you my thinking. So you guys know I have a course on geopolitics, which is long. It's 12 meetings, and every meeting is like 2 hours, and it's very demanding, and there is a lot of workbook. There is a workbook, and in the end, you all present a geopolitical analysis. But watching this video, I thought, you know what, that would be fun. Because here is the thing. Do I know much about Botswana and Congo? Probably not enough to be considered an expert on a subject. But what I could do, there are things that are repeating. What kind of questions you ask are things that are repeating. The methods to recognize bullshit is something that repeats itself, okay? There is a reason why you need a whole intelligence department to try to understand what's going on in every country. It's not simple. There is like a cultural barrier, there's a language barrier, and there is the data collection that is not always easy. But here's the thing. There is something that is common, and those are the tools, which are what kind of data should you look at? What kind of questions should you ask yourself? Just knowing what questions to ask is already, that's it. You solve the problem. Because what you need, first of all, is not to accept things as they are. Because when you do, you get a lot of stupid ideas that cripple into society. So this is what I want to do with you. And what I did is that for my friend, right, who asked me, and I told him, right, like I watched 2 minutes of the video he sent me. I was like, listen, from the 2 minutes I watched while I was driving, I can tell you it's complete bullshit. And I thought maybe that would be something that would interest you guys as well. And he was like, you know, I'm your friend. I deserve special treatment. Just tell me what's wrong. And I said, you know what? I'll do it. I'll do the start, but I'm not going to finish. And I'll do it on purpose because I want to show you my thinking. Okay, so the first 2 minutes of the video, I did some thinking. But the 6 minutes after that, not necessarily. Okay? So I thought I would share my thinking with you. So it has to do with Congo and Botswana because this is an example they use in why nations fail. So a little bit of so I was about to tell you a very interesting story. Okay, so as somebody whose parents were trained in the how to lie like a Soviet methods, I was lucky enough to get that kind of training since youth. Okay, so I want to share with you the story that I've heard yesterday. So I don't know if do you guys know who Mahmoud Abbas is, also known as Abu Mazen? I hope you do, but I don't have really that much time to check the chat to see that you actually know who Mahmoud Abbas, aka Abu Mazen, is. I do want to go. All right. Oh, Shana is saying, no, the volume is good. Okay, good. I'm happy to hear that. How to like a Soviet. Okay, so let me start with this beautiful example I heard last night at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Okay, don't ask me why I was awake, but okay. So Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, the little bitch that he is, did his dissertation in Moscow. And he had a very interesting thesis, right? He had proved that Zionists had cooperated with the Nazis, right? So whatever the Nazis did, that was in cooperation with the Zionists. And this lady that studies those methods that this data is being sold had shared that, you know, the Soviets had realized in 67 and before that Israel poses a threat to their Bolshevik selling operation because it was an opposing force and Israel was involved in places like Africa. Israel in the beginning was very involved. They brought irrigation systems to Africa. They started doing a lot of business in Africa. Russia saw it and was like, you know what, we don't like Israel being in Africa. This is a threat to our Bolshevik ideology. We're going to fight back. So they went ahead and told the Africans that Zionism is racism. How? Well, they twisted it. But I don't want to go into that specific example of how Zionism turned into racism in Africa and how Zionism turned into Nazism in Europe and how Zionism, like every area, right? They understood that the equation between Zionism and Nazism would work in Europe, but Nazism didn't have the same impact on the African psychology. So in Africa, Zionism was racism, and every area had received the kind of materials that would work with the kind of perception of understanding and reality that this place had. So here's how Mahmoud Abbas, I have nothing nice to say about him, had proved that the Zionists had cooperated with the Nazis. So the interesting part is that it was actually hard work to get his whole dissertation. So at first she got like the first 11 pages, and then this idea was presented and it sounds like far-fetched. But then when she managed to get the whole dissertation, she was like, okay, let's check for the resources. Now listen, how did they figure out that the Zionists had cooperated with the Nazis? It was a joint effort. Well, I don't know. Have you ever heard of the Judenrat and the Kapo? Basically, there were Jews that were handpicked by the Nazis and by the way, they, for the most part, they were executed and dealt with every time. There were different Jews who thought different thoughts when they received this kind of job. But basically, it was the people that were responsible in coordinating the Jewish community when it comes to, okay, who are we going to send to the gas chambers, who is staying in the ghetto, who is going to the ghetto, how do we take their stuff in the most comfortable way. Like the Nazis wanted it to be organized, and what better way than using some community member that was maybe important and pointing a gun at his head and forcing him or them, not everybody cooperated with that, okay? And here's what's interesting, and this is fact number one, okay? There were couples, there was Judenrat, that's fact number one. Now we have fact number two. During the 30s, Patrick, thank you so much for your support. Fact number two, during the 30s, the 20s, the 10s, there was a booming industry, there were two types mostly of youth movements in the Jewish community in Europe, worldwide to be honest, but we're focusing on Europe now. There was the Bund, so there was a communist movement and there was the Zionist movement, and a lot of kids would go to one of them, and some of them were Zionist and communist, aka kibbutzim. Okay, so there were conventions and people would go to hear about the idea of moving to Israel and then this new movement, this option to be part of the Zionist movement, And what Mr. Abu Mazen did, he said, okay, we have the couple on one hand, and we have these Zionism movements that basically every Jew went to. What does it mean? He went ahead and checked the history of the couple. And he was like, oh, you see, most of the couple, or I don't even know if most, but he chose those who had participated as children in a Zionist youth movement. And from that, he concluded the unavoidable conclusion that the Zionists had cooperated with the Nazis, because the couple cooperated with the Nazis the way they did, right? F the details, who cares about the details? Who cares how the Nazis made them cooperate with them? That's not important. And they, as kids, some of them went to the Zionist movement, or youth Zionist movement. So you take that, you have couples, and you have a Zionist movement that the Jews participated in. And you do 1 + 1. Obviously, the Zionists cooperated with the Nazis. Amazing. 10 out of 10. That's the logic. That is the logic. And this is the exact kind of logic they use for everything. Now, Baruch Hashem, pure Marxism, as is hard to sell. Because it's like Nazism, right? So pure communism or pure Marxism, if you just quote it. Okay, let's be honest. Right now, it's really easy to sell because people are so illiterate that they don't even know what the original manifesto sounded like. But there was a period that people read books because they were bored, and the TV had one channel, and because of that. So during those beautiful times, you had to understand. So you're like, oh, you heard about Marxism and it's bad. So some even did the due diligence of like, okay, let's see what the Marxist manifesto sound like. So if you actually quote the Marxist manifesto, didn't work as well. So they adjusted it, they became a little bit more sophisticated. And to understand how it became a little bit more sophisticated, let's review the video that my friend had sent me. And I see you guys are somewhat having fun in the comments. All right. Let's start. Read what Mark said. Is this theory completely false? It has some truth in it. What did Mark? What would more work before this final solution? So there were attempts in the beginning, very, very beginning, to, because there were conventions like in 1938 where Hitler had presented an option to exile the Jews instead of having the final solution. And the Israelis were like, okay, so if we work with the Nazis, we might be able to convince them to let Jews come to Israel. They quickly realized this is all a farce and it's not going to work, that actually exile is not an option. Yeah. So, all right, let's watch the video. How about that? Oh no, where is my face? One second. All right, here I am. Sorry. Or maybe I should use this one. Now I have two faces. Ha. All right. Wait, no, I need one of them at least. I'm sorry. Just want to move myself. Move somewhere else. Come on, can do it. All right. Okay, so this is what I got, this video.
By James A. Robinson. Summary. From
Yeah.
Why Nations Fail by James A. Robinson. Summary. From 4-Minute Books. Written by Luke.
Why does it get stuck? What did I do?
And read to you by John B. Lean.
Why does it get stuck? What's happening?
One sentence summary. Why nations fail dives into.
I know why. I bet my earphones are connected to two devices and it drives it crazy. Yep. I got it. All right. Let's go back a little bit because that kind of. You guys are having fun making fun of me. Like I had a boomer moment. Yes. I had a boomer moment. I'm not gonna deny.
Written by Luke Rowley and read to you by John B. Lean. One sentence summary. Why nations fail dives into the reasons why economic inequality is so common in the world today and identifies that poor decisions of those in political power are the main reason for unfairness rather than culture, geography, climate, or any other factor.
So this is where they lost me. Okay, like this here they lost me, okay? That poor decisions of those in political power. Who has political power? Who is it that has political power? Who? And who gives the political power to those who have political power? So they lost him right there. And then, so poor decisions of those in political power are the main reason for unfairness rather than culture. What is culture exactly, if not what makes you decide the decisions that you make? Then what do you base your decisions on, if not your culture, geography, and climate? Do you think a decision maker can decide to be an oil-rich country if the country is not located geographically somewhere with oil? Do you know what it feels like to try to fight against your own culture? Like, and by the way, I went ahead and checked the actual book. This is the book. This person that wrote this got a Nobel Prize in economy in 2024. Now, I don't know. I am very weirded out about it. By the way, the reason I do it live is because I look forward for you guys to push back on me. Maybe I'm the crazy one and not those who give Nobel Prizes. So all bad economic decisions are the fault of the government? No, they're not. You know what's a bad economic decision? To poop in the river that you drink from. That's not a government's decision. That's a cultural decision.
Favorite quote from the author. As we will show, poor countries are poor because those who have power make choices that create poverty.
Who has power? You know what's funny? Did you guys watch Starmer lately? There was this court decision that had been made. I think now I'm not like super on top of everything, but I just picked it up. So maybe I understood wrong. But what I've understood is that the court in the United Kingdom is now gonna use people's profiles to decide how to judge them. Meaning, if I'm a woman, I'm gonna get a different judgment than a man, which is, by the way, always true. You cannot like ignore the fact that there are different genders, right? So, I mean, there are things that you would judge differently according to who is in front of you, because some things are less believable. Like if, it's a fight one-on-one in a street, if there is a quarrel, and then the claim would be that somehow like the woman overcame the man and I don't know, some bullshit attacked him and then like whatever, you know, and you have a scrawny one like a scrawny little woman. I mean, I would never fight in your life. Like, you know, there is something, but that's different. Obviously, like we're talking about things that don't matter, which is skin color and where are you from and ethnicity and nationality. And then apparently this kind of public profile is now gonna be used to make core decisions, which is very different from having a blind lady that makes the judgment. But the thing is, Keir Starmer, if I'm not mistaken, actually said that he is disappointed with this decision, that even in his delusional world, this doesn't make sense and is very different from the ideal. And you know, it has to be very, very extreme for Keir Starmer to come and say, whoa, that's not cool. And then what did he say after that? Like, I wish I could do something about it. Dude, you are the prime minister. So when Keir Starmer reads this quote, is he gonna think, hey, I'm a person in power? No, he's gonna say, I wish I had power. I'm just the prime minister. Who am I? I cannot like overturn the court that went crazy woke. Just the way they are. You know, I try. I'm just the prime minister. I cannot do anything. Literally. And this is the number one thing. Do you think you don't have a political power? You all have a political power. Ask the person in Czech Republic who stood in front of the Soviet tank and changed the course of history. Ask the person who set themselves on fire in Tunisia in a market and has changed the course of history. You have a political power. The only thing is that you might not want to do or sacrifice yourself and do whatever, you know, and execute your political power. The reality is that most of us have a lot more political power than we want to admit. I also saw an interview with not Theresa. She was a prime minister in UK and she resigned pretty quickly. What was her name? Anyway, she got interviewed in one of those British podcasts and she also expressed that feeling of powerlessness. Girl was the prime minister. Okay, Keir Starmer is the prime minister. Also, Netanyahu has points where he is powerless. And yet people are like, I don't have. So what is this? This is how communists think. This is communism. Because if you believe in liberalism and capitalism, then you own a capital because you are a free person and you have the political power. So this statement doesn't make sense from the get-go, because the corrected statement would be, as we will show, poor countries are poor because people who live there make choices that create poverty. That is the unwoke statement. Right, let me see, you guys. Why are you guys talking about ice cream? And Shauna, thank you so much for your support here. The ignorance of geography is the source of most of the world's current stupidity and arrogance. Yes and no, because I'm gonna go later because there is another book called Of Guns and Germs and I forgot. Anyway, Guns and Germs, and it talks about geography as the drive of everything, but human matter too, and people move. It has a lot to do with geography, but it's not be all end all. But yes, You cannot ignore anything. You cannot ignore the culture, you cannot ignore religion, you cannot ignore people, and you cannot ignore geography. There is nothing you can ignore. The problem is that once you have, it's so easy to focus on the institutions, right? It's so easy to focus on the government, because then people are like, okay, there is one thing at fault here. So we're going to protest again. What's the thing that is responsible? And if it's multifaceted, if there are a lot of things, yes, thank you. Guns, germs, and steel. Sorry, yeah, I don't know why I had this. You guys, yeah, gun, germs, and steel. Where they put, I think, too much emphasis on geography. But anyway, but it's true. Geography matters. Everything matters. But people, it's not sellable. It's so much easier to blame one thing. And it's like if that one thing would get solved, then everything's going to be fine. Such an easy slogan. So wrong, though. Daniel gone. We need government to actually care about the people. They usually become sellouts to corporate interests. Also, Islam being in power is bad. What if I would tell you, you only get the leader that you deserve? The leader reflects the population. There is a saying like that in the Talmud or the Bible, I don't remember, that you cannot have a leader that is better than the generation he is leading. The way the leader conducts themselves is the same way the population conducts themselves, and it cannot be mismatched, because they have to be on the same level, because otherwise there wouldn't be an understanding between the ruling party and the population. There must be a common logic, right? So that is need to be careful about it. The thing is, like, a government can incrementally bring the population to somewhere better, but it's so rare that things can just overturn in overnight. And Shana, guns, germs, and steel, thank you for reminding me. Thank you guys for your support. It means a lot, I have to say right now, okay? This is how I keep going. And I also want to say that more than anything, if you can buy me coffee, that is the best platform to use, because I don't know, I just like it better. Okay, Jackson Wade. I hope the weather is nice and all is well. By the way, Shana also participated in the first round that I did on the course that I did on geopolitics. And there we go through everything. So we build a society from scratch. We go through geography from scratch. And we understand culture from scratch. So we do everything. And with that, the goal is for you to be able to have this understanding that even though you know nothing about Congo or Botswana, you're gonna know what questions to ask and what to look for.
Darren Achemolu.
Thank you. I want to share. Yes, the course was really good. You should all take it. I'm just gonna tell you that it's not an easy course, okay? It's a high level, high intensity, hard on brain cells course, just so you're prepared. So if you are into that, if you want to know how to do those things, if you want to see those things, then go ahead and sign up. It's a very much hands-on course, and I'm there with you all the time.
Why do some nations prosper while others struggle and are plagued with poverty and greed? Some people say it has everything to do with a nation's location, culture, or lack of knowledge, but surely this can't be the whole picture. Just look at Botswana. It currently has one of the fastest increasing economies in the world. Meanwhile, close by, Congo and Sierra Leone are stuck in a cycle of violence and poverty. Why Nations Fail: The Origins of Power, Prosperity, and Poverty by Darren Achemolu and James A. Robinson centers around the question.
So here's the thing. What is this example?
Why nations?
All right. So it might show more of how unique Botswana cases is than say anything about Congo or Sierra Leone. Because this is the part where I search, this is where I said, let's just check. First of all, Botswana is a tiny nation, and it's the second largest producer of diamonds. And I went and actually looked before. Diamonds were found in South America by South Africa by farmers, okay? And Botswana is not far from South Africa, so there was a reason to look for diamonds there. It's a tiny nation. It's landlocked. And it doesn't have several elements. Congo is a huge nation, 100 million people, okay? And Botswana, being so small, had the advantage of also being overlooked by, like I said before, a country that really doesn't like the Zionist help in Africa that happened in the 60s, where they went ahead and created connections and built irrigation systems. So they started intervening, and Congo was one of the countries they intervened in the most. Because it's huge, Botswana is tiny, it's easy to overlook it, and because it's smaller, it also means it's easier to penetrate, meaning it's way easier to reach out to the whole population. So it's easier to penetrate. It has diamonds, and there was a suspicion that there were diamonds there. And they went ahead and asked for protection from the right country. They asked for protection not from the USSR, but from Britain. And them having, and there was a real need for a place, because there was also this pandemic of blood diamonds, right? So Botswana is a place that relatively, unlike Congo, it's easier to track, it's smaller. So building a system that is not blood diamond system, and actually tracking it, proving it, because there are a lot of companies, right, that would literally fail if it would be proven that they source their diamonds from blood, that are the diamonds they source are blood diamonds. And by the way, in that section specifically, if you want me to bring an expert on diamonds one day, my cousin is an expert on it. I don't know as much as he does, but he knows everything and anything about diamonds everywhere, who works on it, how it's sourced, how it's being sold, everything. He actually built a platform to coordinate all the sales of diamond in large scales, so just if you guys are interested in diamonds. So maybe I should have called him before, but he's a busy person, so I can ask him. But if you guys are interested in that, I might be able to drag him over. So yeah. So it's actually Botswana has a very special case. And now, another thing that Botswana is lucky versus Sierra Leone is mostly Muslim. Being mostly Muslim is not very good for your economy usually, because it's harder population to deal with. They wouldn't by the way, Botswana, one of their major, one of the 7% of what Botswana exports to is Israel, and probably more, considering the way that Israel hides its involvement with many industries because of BDS movements. So Israel is very good with hiding who they cooperate with. So it's very it's like undercovers a lot of it. So my guess would be even more than 7%. And a country like Sierra Leone, even if it had an opportunity to work with a country like Israel, wouldn't do it because of Islamic reasons. So even if they had been given opportunity to get richer by working with those who have money and genuinely want to make the country better, they would say no. Congo is huge, which makes it really hard to penetrate. And Botswana is small. And let's talk about the number one lie here. Is Botswana really not a failure? Is Botswana not a failure? I'm not sure they are not a failure. They have a crazy percentage of the population in Botswana has HIV. Crazy percentage. Huge percentage. Is it not a failure? Is having such a huge percentage of the population suffering from HIV not something to consider as maybe it is a failure? And the country that was very comfortably ignored in Africa, I don't know if it was on purpose that, okay, it's only sub-Saharan Africa that we're talking about, but you cannot tell me that Sierra Leone and Botswana, look, they are just as far away from each other, if not more, than Sierra Leone and the country I'm gonna name right now, which I think has an even bigger GDP per capita than Botswana. And this beautiful place is also where the #1 slave market, the biggest slave market in the world, is at. And it's also a place where you have the worst kind of dictatorship. And you had the worst kind of dictatorship, now it's getting better. It doesn't get better, it's just a different type of dictatorship. But Gaddafi, Libya was the richest one that is not an island, basically. And still is, because they have shit ton of oil, and they have a great location, right next to Italy. And they have a beautiful slave market. So, are you saying that countries that have slave markets are the best countries? They're the most successful? So, or is it that they are, or is it that they are not the same culture? Because I find, listen, I'm gonna be a woke person for a moment. Personally, claiming that Sierra Leone, Congo, and Botswana have the same culture, I find it offensive. Especially Sierra Leone. If a country has a majority Muslim population versus a country that doesn't have a Muslim population, you call it the same culture. I don't know if you know what culture is, sir. So, and so what's the truth here? Where is the truth here? Yes, Botswana has a huge diamond history, and it's a small country, easy to penetrate, and it got lucky. But it's HIV infested. So is it even successful? I don't know even the basic premise. I don't know if the basic premise is even true. Because guess what? I'm sure that the country is a failure because it has so much HIV. And if it had a different culture, maybe less rapes or something, there would have been less HIV and it would have been less of a failure. So not only do you narrow your options into the most comfortable country, like ignore Libya, because, I don't know, they're white, You're the racist. You lump people together just because they're black? And you think it's a legit comparison? Anyway, sorry. There's so many problems just from the get-go. And it's like, people get to see that and they're like, oh, interesting. So Botswana is a landlocked country that had been the GDP had been consistently growing versus these other countries that really don't have an excuse. Wow. Yes, it's true. It's gonna be a saying here that, yes, they had been infiltrated by Western powers that made it the way it is. But is the country not a failure? Still a failure. Is it because? But they asked. They are the ones who came to the Brits. It was their choice. So what made them make that choice? Maybe because they are not Muslim, maybe because they are closer to South Africa, maybe why? Why did they make that choice? And because they have fundamentally a different culture from Congo and Sierra Leone. Maybe that's why. Maybe something there is different. Yeah, I'm Warren Kinging. Yeah, hey David. Botswana has 20% of it with HIV. So to me, when people present you something like that, okay, I have a story. So when the Soviet Union fell, there was a conversation. I'm gonna change the scenery a little bit because it's unrelated. There was this meetup between Americans and Russians, and the Russians told them how they live. And the thing is, in Russia, the Soviet Union would give an apartment. You can sign up, and after some time, you get an apartment. So the rent was cheap. In America, the rent is expensive, and it really weighs down on people's pockets to have like renting. But in Russia, it's first of all, the apartments are small. You live with a grandma and your grandpa until you finally like wait for a couple of decades to get an apartment. That's one. And Americans live alone. But the Americans heard that they don't have to pay rent, and their reaction was, oh my God, so your life is good actually. And the Russians just look at them and were like, but we are hungry. There is no food. Do you have to spend your whole summer collecting food in the forest and preserving it so that you wouldn't starve in the winter? What about that? What about the fact that the apartments are small and you live with grandma and grandpa until you finally get an apartment from the state? It's not a choice. It's not like you can pay anyone to just live somewhere else. It's not you have to rent a room at someone's place. It doesn't work this way. Or, they have to live. Like it's just because the rent is cheap, their life in Russia is good. This is exactly that, right? So just because it looks like there is a nice graph here, it means Botswana is successful? Does it mean anything?
Nations Fail: The Origins of Power, Prosperity, and Poverty by Darren Ashimoglu and James A. Robinson centers around the question.
Do you understand that he got a Nobel for economics? And the book is no different, okay? Because I was maybe the person who summarized the book did a really bad job. And they did a little bit of a bad job. Because the book is just a little tiny bit more nuanced, because in the book they're okay, so Botswana is successful because the power structure, the institutions that they chose were, they went to the Brits. And this decision was the decision made by the leader. Fair enough, I agree. If every country in Africa would cooperate with the West and Israel, their life would be better. But can a leader of a Muslim country do that, even if they had all the power in the world? What would happen? Because it just... Okay, so one of the chapters in the workbook in my course is a story by Khalil Gibran. Khalil Gibran was a writer, a Christian Maronite, Lebanese, in the beginning of the 20th century. Amazing writing. And in the story there, I don't know if I should give you spoilers, but one of his stories, he really experienced this kind of thinking firsthand. So he actually has a story about this king that is all powerful. He can do whatever he wants. And at some point, some witch came and dropped the little potion in the well, and all the village went crazy except for the king, who had his own reserves or something, right? And this is the story, okay? So I'm not gonna, if you, in the workbook, I ask different questions about it because it's more geopolitics oriented, but here's the thing, okay? Khalil Gibran understood this mentality very well. There is a reason why he chose this powerful king that had 100% of the whole village's like decision-making ability. And yet, if the village drank the water in the well and went crazy, they looked at their leader and they were like, what happened to the leader? The leader doesn't make sense. And even though a day ago they all agreed that this leader is amazing and that we should do whatever he says, after they drank from the well, they were like, no, this leader is crazy. His decision making is crazy. And there is a reason why Khalil Gibran, who grew up in Lebanon, experienced this culture firsthand, had written that book. Because if there is a leader in a Muslim country that would say, hey, cooperating with Israel could save you, could save your lives, the whole village would come with torches and be like, our leader is crazy, our leader is crazy. And that is culture. So that doesn't work this way. The leader can be all powerful, but there is a reason Khalil Gibran, who understood this kind of culture, wrote this story.
Of why some nations remain poverty-stricken while others live in abundance. In this eye-opening book, the authors explain that the difference is actually the result of economic and political institutions put in place during critical junctures in history. Here are just 3 of the many eye-opening lessons I got from this book. 1. The best way to explain the difference in living standards between countries is by looking at their institutional differences. 2. A single event at a critical juncture can mean a world of difference for a country's success. 3. It can be really hard to break out of the cycle of poverty, but it is possible. Let's get right to it.
So here's the interesting part, right? So when you put it like that, so it all makes sense, right? Because, the best way to explain the difference in living standards between countries is by looking at their institutional differences. Well, the best way to know if somebody is healthy or not is to see how long it takes them to run a 10K. It works. You would 100% understand who is unhealthy or in some way or another if they cannot run a 10K. Does it mean everybody who runs 10K are healthy? No, because there can be an underlying issue that is not yet erupted. So, for example, Botswana, that was given here, they would crash if they depend on the diamond industry. If the diamond industry would crash, the whole system would break apart. Do they have an alternative? So it's a sick country that looks healthy because they can run a 10K, but that's just because like the cancer didn't hit the right spots yet. So it's an underlying issue. But it sounds correct. It sounds like it's correct. A single event at a critical juncture can mean a world of difference for a country's success. That's true. For example, if Israel had lost the 1948 war, Judaism would have died. To be honest, it would have completely changed. So, it can be really hard to break out of the cycle of poverty, but it is possible. And this is an important point because it's something we have to believe in. Otherwise, nobody would do anything.
It can be really hard to break out of the cycle of poverty, but it is possible. Let's get right to it and see what we can discover about inequality. Lesson 1. If you want to explain why 2 countries can have such different living standards,
and somebody's saying, If a country is poor, that is their nature. Not if no outside forces contribute. But there are always outside forces, and also it's not exactly true. A country can be poor if, and by the way, this is one of the problems of having set in stone borders. Climate change, for example, can turn a country to be completely arid. And if you don't have even any source of water, like a no exit to the ocean, you don't even have water to desalinate. It is very possible that you can be the best in the world, right? And still be somehow stuck in a situation that is very hard not to be poor in.
Just look at the institutions they have put in place. Forget age-old theories that some countries struggle economically because of their location. There are far too many countries next to each other that have different living standards to prove this as false. The economic landscape.
Just because countries live next to each other, does it mean that they have the same story? I don't think so.
Next to each other that have different living standards to prove this as false. The economic landscape determines the difference between these countries. These are the regulations directing the economy within a country's borders. This includes things such as public services, property law.
So this is just a mishmash. All right, let's listen a little bit, because this is where I stopped listening, because I was like, you know what, this is so much bullshit. I don't even know how to deal with it, but let's do it together now. Okay, let's listen for a little bit. And every other sentence sounds like bullshit to me, but yeah.
Laws and access to financing. A country can have either inclusive or extractive to each other that have different living standards to prove this as false.
So I'm not convinced that having countries close to each other prove anything, especially if they don't like geography in this book, but if you have a mountain range between two countries and they're next to each other, one country would be a desert, the other would be a lush forest. Different, very different. And a result of that and because of that difference in geography, the culture would be different, the industries would be different, everything would be different. And they're next to each other. But the mountain range between two proximate places is two different geographies completely.
Economic landscape determines the difference between these countries. These are the regulations directing the economy within a country's borders. This includes things such as public services, property laws, and access to financing. A country can have either inclusive or extractive economic institutions. Inclusive economic institutions pave the way for economic success because they encourage citizens to participate in economic activities. They are strong in economic freedom. Examples of this include South Korea and the USA, where the economy benefits from private property laws, developed banking sectors, and strong public education. This system encourages people to work hard and be creative because
again,
at a country's borders. This includes things such as public services.
Sorry, I just got the message and it distracted me from the amount of crap they managed to put in 5 seconds.
Property laws and access to financing. A country can have either inclusive or extractive economic institutions. Inclusive economic institutions pave the way for economic success because they encourage citizens to participate in.
Why? Why? How is it true? What makes you say that? How did we move from 1 to second? Actually, there is another thing that I said that when I told it, actually talked about it with my mom. And I said, you know, there is no proof for that. But there might be even a larger, like a more solid case that inclusivity is a byproduct of success and not the other way around. Look at Switzerland. women couldn't vote until 1971. Great success, very successful country. Another thing I want to say, like a lot of times men don't think about women as humans at all. So when they say inclusive, they don't even check the case of women. So, but it's the same, like, it's the same with the ethnicities, it's the same. It's like, even if you go to ethnicities, even if you go by race, my hunch is there would be a greater argument. There might be even a more solid base to suspect that inclusivity is a privilege that is you can afford only after you succeed and not the other way around. And welcome, David Summer, to my Rebecca's Bosses Club. Torvald, how do you know that? I don't. I would actually argue that what I'm saying is not necessarily true. But if you wanted to twist a case, actually, I'm not even sure it's not necessarily true. Because imagine you have a population where one population is harder to penetrate than the other. So when you focus on the population that is easier to, and they already understand the value of education, they would invest in it. And when those who already understand the value of education invest in something, then you can start reaching out to the wider population that doesn't necessarily understand the point of education yet. Because even just going to study is an investment. And just because you open up an institution doesn't mean that everybody's going to go ahead and run into to school. You have to convince them that it's useful, and not everybody knows that. So seeing that some people who understand the value of education are more successful would drive others to, hey, maybe it does work and I should put in the effort. But an education is not just money. It's also time. And just because you turn something to inclusive doesn't mean that you would convince everybody to put in the time. So I wouldn't, of course, it has more to do with culture than ethnicity per se. Even though there is a correlation doesn't always mean causation. So do I know it? I don't, but it's almost like, I didn't want to, my mom was right. She was like, don't talk about it. You're just going to confuse people. Anyway, sorry. So it's, I'm just saying that there is this is a weird comment.
They are strong in economic freedom. Examples of this include South Korea and the USA, where the economy benefits.
So here's the thing, like, the United States had a segregation. Like, are you saying that the United States was not economically successful before they decided to remove the segregation between blacks and whites in education systems? It was successful, definitely, compared to the world. South Korea was very sexist. Was it not successful? Yes. They were very successful, and at the same time they were very sexist. It doesn't prove itself long term necessarily, because it does become more problematic, but that's a weird thing to say.
Private property laws, developed banking sectors, and strong.
The thing is, like, I would say, like, at some point you cannot afford not to include the whole population in something, so because that would bring you down, right? You cannot have just some of the population do something, but that doesn't mean that from the get-go everybody are included. So because here is those are countries that are great, very inclusive, but were they inclusive from the get-go? Was there a point in history where they weren't exclusive and successful, economically speaking? Weird. You cannot you cannot compare oranges to apples, and you cannot compare countries that are mature to countries who are developing and just learned how to read.
This system encourages.
Yeah, no, South Korea was not successful until US was there. True. I mean, I guess it's this is the thing. It's like, to me, it's more important to ask the question than to delve to the exact history. I'm asking the question because I wanna show how easy it is to ask yourself something that would make you doubt what you are being told, even though it sounds true. Yeah, it makes sense. Like, from our understanding of the world, right, from the way it is now, we can see this correlation, but correlation is not always causation. And even if there is causation, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is where you start at. It might be that it takes time until you get to the point where you have to be inclusive. But this thinking is boring and kind of like more difficult and more nuanced. So it sounds smart that inclusivity, like, sorry, South Africa is a classic case where actually, you know what, it was more successful when it was not inclusive. In fact, becoming inclusive so fast had brought it to, they're going towards a genocide there, let's be honest. And a complete like deterioration of the country. So South Africa is like a country that would prove otherwise, and if it weren't for sanctions, then they would be super successful, right? So, but the world punished it for the apartheid state that it had. Same thing with Rhodesia, if I'm not mistaken. Could have been a very, very rich country, but it was under an embargo and could not afford not exporting. So is it even true if we have an example like South Africa? Maybe culture and geography is actually very important and even more important than the institutions. You can be successful despite a stupid institution, but because you're successful, you change the institutions in a way that would make you even more successful. This is progress.
Encourages people to work hard and be creative because they know their efforts will bring wealth. An extractive economic institution receives income from one group in society for the benefit of another group. An example of this is colonial Latin America, which had a system built on the exploitation of indigenous people to benefit colonizers. Another example is North Korea, where the Kim family...
See, like everything here, is it really true? Is it because they... maybe it's because the colonies there never tried to be independent and they were sending all the riches to Spain and back to their origin countries, and it has a completely different story from the United States, and also it has a completely different geography. Brazil is so very hard to navigate. It's very hard to go through one end of a continent to another. Also, without the Panama Canal, like having to go all the way from the bottom, and then you have crazy mountains in the middle that are way higher than what you have in the United States. I don't know. Is it true that this is the reason?
Indigenous people to benefit colonizers. Another example is North Korea, where the Kim family created a repressive regime that didn't allow private property and secured all power for the select elite only. Similarly, politics can also be...
So, but does this example work? All North Koreans are exactly the same. So where is the inclusivity part? This is just a repressive system that is built on socialism that had arisen. But the population made that decision collectively. This is why some North Korean moved to the south, some South Korean moved to the north, because they had individually also made different decisions of what to follow. So where's the inclusivity if they're exactly the same, all of them in North Korea? What is uninclusive? What is inclusivity then? It's not the same. What are you saying, Shana? Thank you for your support. South Africa is advocating openly to kill its own farmers. Yes. We'll see how many South African refugees come to America, and then South Africa can pay its own choices. And I will not feel sad. Yeah. I mean, one can say, like, this is a proof that they chose to be not inclusive, but it's also maybe if you had let things mature, then South Africa would have managed to perpetuate the educational system slowly into the wider population, and you know, if you don't start with enough funds or ability, just like human resources, right? If you only have 5% of the population that is educated, that means that only 5% of the population can even be teachers, right? So how would 5% of the population that could be teachers teach the rest of the 95%? Well, they cannot. What they can do is slowly increase the number of people that are educated, and then the number of teachers that you have available is much larger. But if you are like, no, everybody has to get the same education now, but you look at your teacher, right, who could be a teacher, and you're like, but how can three teachers teach thousands of people who need to be also, you know, they don't have a culture of studying, so you cannot do a Zoom class. They're not going to study through Zoom. You need to have somebody who would sit on them and check their homework every day. How can three teachers do that? How? Just how? Those things are more complicated than that.
Be either inclusive or extractive. An inclusive political institution has pluralism. This means every group in society is being represented politically. They also need centralized power to ensure that the rule of law is upheld.
Now, I feel like at this point of history, we understand exactly where that leads to. This is the groundwork to what DEI is. Now, 13 years later, after this book was written, I think this experiment had proven that it's a failure. So I'm not gonna stop too much here.
And groups don't overrun one another. If a political institution doesn't have pluralism or centralization, they are extractive. An inclusive political institution is best because all groups are represented, which doesn't allow for extractive economic policies.
Also notice, like, it doesn't say what do you mean by inclusive. You know, I would somewhat like appreciate it more if it would have said, you know what, we need to have like groups who represent all thinking, right? So we need to have professors who are more socialist leaning. We need to have professors who are more capitalist leaning. We need to have professors who are more nationalistic. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we need to have that diversity in thinking. We need to have people who are good at math, and we need people who can write, and we need people who can draw. This is also inclusivity. Yet it's not what I didn't notice, but I don't remember seeing this kind of inclusive. Like, what is inclusivity? It's not mentioned, right? Are you talking about skills? Are you talking about political opinions? And then again, even political opinions, like where do we draw the line, right? If there are systems that were proven to be a failure, why would we be like, you know, in the name of inclusivity, let's have an economics teacher that is a communist? We tried, it failed. We learned. Are we gonna try? Like, why? Like, we tried in real life so many times. Like, I don't know.
Lesson 2. One event can mean a country takes an entirely different institutional path, changing the course of its future. In the mid-14th century, the Black Death took almost half of Europe's population. This caused an economic fallout that was responsible for changing Europe's economic future. This is why the authors refer to the Black Death as an example of a critical juncture. This is an event that is influential enough to overturn the socio-political balance of a nation or continent. Before the Black Death, most of the economic and political systems in Europe were extremely extractive. A country's monarch owned land, and he gave his land to lords who promised to give military capabilities in return. Peasants would then take care of the land. They worked hard to make a living, but paid most of what they earned in taxes. In addition, they had almost no freedoms. But when the Black Death hit, there were suddenly huge shortages in labor. The peasants in Western Europe seized this opportunity to demand lower taxes and more rights. Eastern European peasants were not so lucky, however. They were less organized, and landowners managed to take advantage.
So this is okay. I'm gonna say something. I'm an idiot watching this video. You know what my thought is? Oh, interesting. So if we kill half of the population, we're gonna get more rights. Now prove me that this is not the conclusion from this statement. I mean, this is exactly what Lenin had in mind. He was like, let's randomly, completely randomly kill half of the population. Like, by the way, part of his goal is to have it random. Like, here Lenin really believed that randomly 50% need to die, which I guess you cannot have a better recreation of the Black Death than having randomly killing 50% of the population. So please explain to me why, me as an idiot, am wrong. Is it not the conclusion here? Let's just kill half of the population randomly and see what happens. Well, interestingly enough, we have all other examples where half of the population died, and yet did they get more rights? Did Cambodia, the what's his name there? The Cambodia, it killed 50% of the population, right? Did the people who survived, did they have a good life afterwards? No, this dictator died from old age. I don't know why I have a brain fart right now. I cannot remember his name, but you guys know what I'm saying. Okay, fine.
Of this and started hiking taxes higher and making the system even more extractive. This is why the authors call the Black Death a critical juncture in history. For Western Europe.
Yes, atheist. Pol Pot. Thank you. I don't know. My brain is not the most lubricated today. Of course, it's Pol Pot. Yes, thank you, everybody. Yes.
Europe, it spelled the end of extractive feudalism, but in the East, it grew worse. Institutional drift is the result of this difference that led to divergent paths. It's where two similar regions grow in different directions. We saw a similar institutional drift when global trade expanded and the British colonized the Americas. Sometimes it takes centuries.
Okay, so how necessary is the Black Death part? This is the part where I'm as a stupid person watching this video. How critical is the 50% random kill in this change? Curiosity. I don't know. Also, by the way, insurance company started because of the fire in London in 1666. So after that, people are oh, let's start insurance companies because your house might be set on fire, and that's a good idea to have that kind of system. So it's interesting as well. So sometimes, a tragedy happens, and because of that, people are okay, let's try something new. I guess maybe it's a good idea to set cities on fire, like from time to time, to boost creativity in the population. I don't know.
Regions grow in different directions. We saw a similar institutional drift when global trade expanded and the British colonized the Americas. Sometimes it takes centuries, but a small number of critical junctures can mean institutional drift that creates drastically different economic landscapes between once similar areas. Now, before we get into lesson number 3, I'd like to give a quick nod to reading.fm. The amazing people
I don't want to give them
use
a
the
nod.
link below to in history can change the course of a country's future. But what can countries do to fix the extractive institutions they have in place? First, the authors explain that history doesn't necessarily doom the future of these countries. We know that inclusive and extractive institutions can grow from critical junctures. The cycle can be broken. The U.S. South's exclusive
I get it. So what we need to do is to go all those countries that are failures and convince them that if they don't change their ways, like something needs to like shake them up. I mean, I made a video about it, right? When I talked about the anti-Semitism, I said like sometimes only a great trauma can make you rethink your ways. Whether it's the atom bomb on Hiroshima that finally made the Japanese people like rethink their ways, or other things. I mean, trauma can shake up things for sure. It's also a very easy, it's the thing is like, this is the, why is it I see that as underlining communist ideas, because in communism you always have this perpetual need for revolting, right? So the revolution never ends. You always need to shake up the system. You always need to bring something down. And even though this book is like non-communistic, like they say the same thing, the same idea with those examples. It's like, it's the same mindset of the revolution never ends. Like a huge trauma is needed to shake up the system. And if you are maybe less inclusive, but you, in that non-inclusive institutions, you teach the idea that ideally the whole population needs to be educated, but right now you guys are the only ones who understand why education is important and even showed up in this institution to begin with, and it just happens to be that you're all white and from a certain demographic population, I don't know, whatever, then it doesn't look inclusive. But like there is an understanding that it needs to be everyone, but sometimes those who show up in the beginning are not inclusive. It doesn't look inclusive. But when you force it, you don't know what you're gonna get. It's like, it's funny, you had the Black Death and like it was a critical junction, and then some succeeded and some didn't. So you just flip a coin? Is that, it works, yes, flipping a coin, trauma works, but sometimes it just makes you commit and yourself, instead of rethink yourself. It's
institutions against blacks are slowly becoming more economically and politically inclusive. There is still a lot to be done, but the civil rights movement meant that good changes were finally coming for blacks in America. So what can we do? The first thing to do is make sure we encourage inclusive institutions so these countries can grow their own prosperity. Did you know foreign aid does very little to change extractive institutions in Africa and Central Asia? If we want to promote positive,
Of course, because the culture there doesn't have the same values as those who give the money. It's a cultural issue, and it doesn't matter who you're going to pluck out of society. They all have the same culture.
Long-lasting change, we need to direct foreign aid in a more meaningful way. The groups that are excluded from institutions need to have ways to defy the oppressing institutions. For example, in Brazil, a grassroots movement of empowered people, rather than politicians, overthrew the country's military dictatorship in 1985. Social movements led by these people paved the way for a coalition that resisted any future dictatorships. Ever since Brazil broke that cycle, it has seen a huge rise in prosperity.
HIV is a critical moment for Africa. Well, if we stop supplying them medication, it would be.
In fact, between the years 2000 and 2012, it was one of the world's fastest growing economies. This serves as proof that shattering the chains of poverty is never too late.
Hey, this is Nick, the founder of 4 Minute Books, and if you're struggling with this...
I mean, cool story. Here's the thing. Sometimes a population matures to demanding their rights, and rightfully so. Sometimes, let's say, there is a previously slave population that started reading, learned Christianity, and started advocating for their rights by using scripture, something they couldn't do, their ancestors couldn't do. They had matured. And it's easier, right? So in America, people like, and with that, they obviously need to be included, but the other population was sleeping on that. They didn't notice, right? They didn't notice that the black population deserves to be part of the political system, even though it created something like Obama. But that's actually, those are not African Americans. Obama is an alien or whatever. Just cannot miss an amendment to this Obama. But they're like African Americans that were. Nothing wrong with them, 100% fine. Like, you know, cool people, smart people. It's not, you know, sometimes yes, sometimes it makes sense that, like, you know, like, listen, I'm a woman as well, right? Why do I need to listen to, why should I shut up because I'm a woman? I can do better geopolitical analysis than the majority of men. So, and Israel needs voices. Can you imagine, like, I'd be like, a woman, shut up? And they're like, I cannot contribute. Can you really afford not having women fight for the Hezbollah in Israel? We barely have people. This is also why, can we even afford not having women in the military? No, we cannot even afford it. Some things are a privilege as well, but, like, you know, but in general, if you want and the more sophisticated science gets, the more you want to get all of the brilliant minds. So you cannot not be inclusive, because you don't know where the brilliant minds are. Even if women are more stupid on average, or whatever population are more stupid, you cannot afford to miss out on the 1 in 100, because this is how critical these people are. Like, this is how critical it is to have geniuses in a high-tech society. One person can make a huge difference, and every person is like gold, is like a diamond. Right? I mean, diamonds are not really worth anything, but, like, you know. So, I just don't like this kind of approach. So, okay. DeepSeek was created by a woman. I don't know if it's a compliment for a woman, but yeah. A lot of things were created by women, obviously, even when they weren't allowed to. Right? Like, there were always exceptions. There were always this anonymous painter that is anonymous because it's a woman. There was always, like, those anonymous scientists because they were women. It's not like you have Sarah and Dvorah who led an army and was a prophet. Like, And one of the things that it said, like in that generation, the men, like there was no leader, and a woman rose up, and she was the leader the people needed. It's not always that you can afford to have that mindset of not being inclusive. That's the problem. Like when there are exceptions that, and people you just cannot afford to give up on. So it's a balance, right? There is a balance there. Anyway. All right. Here, there you go. Woman killed Muhammad. By the way, I'm editing my video on Islam, and when I talked about who is the second most important figure in Islam, I chose Khadija, because she sponsored Muhammad. If she didn't sponsor him, we would have gotten rid of him way earlier, and nobody would have. I mean, if he actually existed and it wasn't just an, you know. So, for better or worse. So imagine if Khadija was like properly educated woman and everything, and then she would have known that like do not give power to Muhammad. By the way, women also give power to men, and if they're educated, then you would have a population that wouldn't give power to the wrong men as well. So that's another aspect of it. And can you imagine like not having women, like can you even have educated kids if the mother is uneducated? Like it's not necessarily like, it's all where you are at. If you have only 3 teachers, you cannot be inclusive, not necessarily. It's a cycle, but increments, and not killing half of the population, right? Like it's a theory. It's a repeating theory. Let's kill half of the communism is let's kill half of the population. Nazism is let's kill half of the population. Islam is let's kill half of the population. They all are like that. They all think there is a population. It needs to be like at least half needs to be killed at any point, right? Even if it's like we're all Sunni now, then you have to get rid of the 50% who are not Sunni enough. And it's the same mindset, like the revolution never stops. You get rid of 50% of the bad seeds, there are gonna be another 50% that is a bad seed. And that would shake up the system. So why choose, like, like it's cool, a Black Death, like things shake up the system, and then 50% went here and 50% went there. So, okay. Like, that's how you build a narrative. People were convinced that you need to get rid of 50% of the population. They were convinced. Because those things, those little brainwashing waves, like they build a narrative and people don't understand. Like they see that, like who would think that this is calling for annihilation of 50% of the population? Well, it plants the idea. It does. And this is critical thinking, is also be like, why? It's also saying this is a dangerous example. And it's an important example to make, but it's also important to say it's a dangerous example. So you can do that. You can do that. Yes, trauma shakes the system, but let's be clear about it. It's a dangerous example. So that's my thoughts. All right, everybody, you guys seem to be interesting. Traora, brainwash, the other people are stupid and liars and evil, don't talk to them. So here's the thing, sometimes it's true. Sometimes they are. This is why those things are so complicated. And you have to have a proper discussion, a boring, long discussion that cannot be summarized in a TikTok video. But that requires patience and incremental steps and constant self-checking. All right, everybody, I'm gonna say goodnight to you all. Thank you for being here.